I see companies today saying, I am dropping my facial recognition product. That reinforces that letter. That reinforces the culture. That CEO and that leadership team said, pull it. What are we fooling ourselves? It's not making any money anyway. Like, come on.
5 years ago, if you said Black Lives Matter, people thought you were some militant. Now everybody's hashtagging it out. Black Lives Matter everywhere. And that's great. I'm happy to see that. But what does that mean beyond a hashtag? How do you live that?
But I think that a lot of white folks are being pushed right now to say, hey, as CEO, what are you doing? And this is wrong. And how are you learning, listening, and then translating that into action?
As a Black man in tech who was raised by, a white family and has three, Black daughters, I can tell you that this particular event has been incredibly profound. I do believe this is different.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marilyn Strickland, and I am pleased to be here today, courtesy of GeekWire, to have what I believe is a very important and relevant conversation. About 2 weeks ago, John Cook of GeekWire reached out to me, and this was really amidst all of the turmoil and challenge that we're seeing around the country with COVID, with the police-involved shootings, and he asked me the question, what can tech do to address some of the disparities around race and inclusion? And I have three fantastic guests today. I have Adriane Brown, Dave Cotter, and Matt Oppenheimer. So as we think about what needs to change or what we need to do and the steps we need to take in the world of tech, what are some things that you think we need to consider?
I have been hardened by the outpouring of messages from CEOs all across the country and across the world. And I found it kind of profound that one after the other, they were coming. And so at the beginning, along with what we were seeing televised on the web and our reading about the protest, it just started to feel that this 8 minutes and 46 seconds witnessed by the world with the taking of George Floyd's life was going to make this different. But it wasn't just about George Floyd. It was for, I think, the first time that I can really hone in the broad acceptance that we have a crisis in America. And before, we've gone through many of these experiences where this crisis came forward. And there have been many actions in the past, supposedly to, take this opportunity and let's move forward and we shall overcome. But I stand here today knowing that we have not overcome. We are far from it. And so this outpouring of personal statements wrapped in our companies was heartfelt. But here's my thing. We'll go back to that very same frustration 10, 15, 20 years from now saying, you know what? It was disruptive, but it didn't stick. It didn't stick again. And I think that business leaders in tech, but in anywhere, really have to take ownership for the culture of their companies. That's something that they personally can do. That takes conversation. That takes say it out loud cultures where people can say, you know what, these two candidates aren't equal. If we want our best team and our best team is not diverse, then we are shortcoming our products and our offerings to our customers. Study after study has shown this, that diverse teams, diverse boards, diverse groups produce better results consistently.
Yep.
So when you don't do it as a leader, when you don't insist upon that as a leader, then you're holding your company back. You're allowing excuses to get in the way of better performance. So that sense of culture has to be laced with courage to push your organization, to listen, to look at not only people, but what you buy, who you buy it from.
Yep.
Look at your philanthropy. Is your philanthropy actually making a difference to this cause as you give things that matter to your company? Are you doing those things? I see companies today saying, I am dropping my facial recognition product in the tech industry. Hats off to IBM, because it is not where it needs to be to serve. It can provide far more harm than it can good. So we're pulling it. I love that. That makes a cultural, that reinforces that letter, that reinforces the culture. That CEO and that leadership team said, pull it. What are we fooling ourselves? It's not making any money anyway. Like, come on. And I think doing more and more of those things, using your PAC to empower the vote. If we want this democracy to really be fulfilled, then voting has to be protected. So are your PACs that you're asking your employees to give, are those PACs supporting voters' rights? So there are many things to do, but it takes a culture change, the CEO owning that, looking at those fundamental things and taking a stand, taking action to make sure that this is not another crisis that we talk about in history that went unfulfilled.
Thank you for that, Adrienne. And you're right. It's, it has to start at the top. 5 years ago, if you said Black Lives Matter, people thought you were some militant. Now everybody's hashtagging it out. Black Lives Matter everywhere. And that's great. I'm happy to see that. But what does that mean beyond a hashtag? How do you live that? So can you talk a bit about your experience?
I would agree with Adrienne that this is not just a moment in time. That it feels like to me that the world has shifted and that this is different. As a Black man in tech who was raised by a white family and has three Black daughters, I can tell you that this particular event has been incredibly profound in terms of the reflection of and recognition of kind of my own privilege in addition to what does it mean for my daughters. So I do believe this is different. In terms of kind of like what to do and what it means, I do think that I've been thinking a lot about like kind of tech and tech's approach to diversity and racism. And, to be honest, I mean, tech for the most part is kind of outsourced diversity to a chief diversity officer, or they hire a consulting firm to identify a set of activities that they should go and undertake. And, back to, the world has changed. I don't think you cannot outsource diversity and you cannot outsource this any longer. It actually requires, tech leaders, CEOs, the C-suite that may be made up of white individuals or non-Blacks are going to actually have to put in the work, and they're going to have to determine how to absorb this into, basically the daily existence and execution of the company. And I think that takes it beyond just simply a hashtag. When I think about like a mental approach for tech CEOs or tech leaders to take, I think the most important thing right up front is I think it's time to listen. I don't think, or what I am seeing is it's the first time where I'm seeing a lot of people, I'm seeing a lot of white executives who, are listening. I wrote an article about my experiences and I've gotten feedback where, they're literally like, I'm listening to my Black friends, I'm listening to the coded language, I'm listening to the words that people say, and it's starting to open up their minds to better empathize. I think there's also, beyond listening, there is, learning. And that is, this is not a moment in time. This is something that's been escalating for 400 years. And no different than you cannot, you shouldn't outsource. You can't treat this as an objective or as an initiative. This actually has to be met with the same intensity and depth by which it traverses backwards, which is 400 years. How did we get here? What are the institutional issues and systems that have led us to this point? And at that point, then I think you can start launching your initiatives. But I think we have to resist our bias to action to start knocking down a punch list of activities in the absence of, have I really learned? Am I really listening? Because as you go through, those two exercises, I can certainly tell you from my experience, they're creating nuances and specifics on what kinds of things I think we should be doing, that in the absence of those two, they just become a list of activities.
So Matt, I would like to talk to you. So, you run Remitly and, you've talked about movement to action. So based on what you're hearing, either within your peer group and the work that you do, or even what you've heard today so far from Adrienne and Dave, tell us what you think. I mean, what do you think we need to do better? What can we do to move forward?
Yeah, well, first, I think to build on a couple of things that were said, I think, Adrienne, to your point, this, I believe, is the work of not the Black community and Black individuals to do. This is on, privileged communities to really do the work and heavy lifting here. It's on us to dismantle racism and to do anti-racism work. So I completely agree with that point. And Dave, to your point on listening, one of the things that we did, and before I get into things that Remitly has done, the other thing I want to say is first off, deeply embedded into who Remitly is and the immigrant customers that we serve, the diverse customers we serve, deeply embedded is diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. And so it's something we've cared about a long time. And I want to be clear, we have made mistakes and we have not done enough. And I think this is a wake-up call for so many companies across the board to do more. And I just want to own we have not done enough and we have not done things earlier and as much as we should have. But because it's been embedded into the DNA of the company for a long time, we have made some investments, just sharing examples for other CEOs or other individuals listening. We hired a director, and director is pretty senior at Remitly of diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, Kim Vu, who is a well-known leader in the Seattle area.
Kim, yes.
Yeah, and Kim
Kim's
is amazing.
Great. She is.
Yeah.
She's amazing.
So she has taught me so much. She's helped us establish affinity groups. So we have a Black and Remitly affinity group that, Dave, to your point, I can listen and engage with. And to the listening point, one of the things that we did right away was we had a company-wide meeting, or company-wide team building event that was set for last Thursday. We just said we're moving that event. This issue is too important. And so what we did is we gave people a half day just to do their own anti-racism work and advocacy. And we gave them resources, both public resources that have been circulated that a lot of people have seen, as well as our own list of resources, so they could spend some time doing that work and listening and learning. I, as part of that, started reading Ijeoma Oluwa's So You Want to Talk About Race? And I emailed the whole company and said, anybody that wants to join in learning with me, respond. And I've had 10 or 15 people respond. We're going to do a book club to kind of learn together because I have a lot of learning to do in this area. So we're starting that process, to Dave's point, around not just jumping into action. We have done some things, which I can talk about later in terms of action, but one of the main actions right away is how do we listen? How do we fully better understand ourselves, and how do we, as a company, give folks the time to do that, because it does take time. And so those are some of the things we've done initially, and I'm really grateful because because we're a mission-driven company, we have a team that really cares about this issue and really wants to invest that time.
It's one of those conversations, as you said, Dave. It's like, young people today, like, they are very, very overt and straightforward and blunt about the language, because we need bluntness. I mean, I think sometimes being too polite is what keeps us to getting to the solutions. And so as we think about this conversation about anti-Blackness, what can we do as individuals to combat it, and what can organizations do to combat it? So I'm going to start with Adrienne.
I have one word that ultimately brings it all together, and that is vote. And that is to inspire voting, to campaign for voting, to spend your time registering people to vote, because the problems that we have of equality and injustice and challenge for human rights starts at the local level, and it is endless, and it goes all the way to the top of our country's leadership across all branches.
Indeed.
And if we don't vote, we will not get rid of the systemic things that have continued to keep us in this current state. And I am just asking people to do everything to enable something so core to this country. And I'm not asking for grandiose, I'm not asking for words. I want people to go and, damn it, vote.
Thank you.
Plus one to what Adrienne said, and maybe I should just stop at that. But the only thing I'll add is changing from defense to offense, and I'll talk about this especially for folks that are white that maybe are for the first time seeing the video of things like George Floyd's death and having a viscerally emotional reaction, as we all have, that pales in comparison to any reaction that a Black individual or communities would have to a video like that. But I think that a lot of white folks are being pushed right now to say, hey, as CEO, what are you doing? And this is wrong. And how are you learning, listening, and then translating that into action? Still having the urgency and action that needs to happen now, but also recognizing it's a lifelong journey, and therefore this takes sustained effort, but approaching it from an open-minded, maybe offense isn't the right word, but listening, learning, and moving forward, as opposed to closing down and not engaging. even if what we're doing isn't perfect. Trying and moving forward would be and with an open mind would be my advice.
Thank you, Matt. Dave?
First and foremost, listen, learn. You're striving for empathy. Get to that empathetic point. Read stuff, listen to stuff, get into the history. I think that the sooner you start to feel a sense of empathy, I think the more powerful and the more impactful you're going to be. Number two is, once you get to that point, I mean, I hate to say it, get fucking after it. Like, tech companies have demonstrated time and time again, whether they want to enter a new market, whether they have decided that they need to respond to a market condition, we're trained to just get after it. We're trained to swarm and to focus and to be relentless and, grind, for lack of a better word. And this is one of those things where let's not just have it be, a thing or a plaque hanging up on the wall. Let's get after it. Let's go grind and let's figure out how to tear it up, because that's, what tech companies have demonstrated is, we know how to solve problems, whether they're for corporate customers or consumer customers. We know how to unlock experiences. So I think as we start to, get into the learning and the empathetic state, let's go solve problems. That's what we do. So let's just get after it.
Thank you. And, and I would say two things. I would say, number one, learn the history. Because I think for a lot of folks, when you hear about the evolution of the journey that Black Americans have had, you think it's so long ago. So long ago. And Adrienne can contest, it has been in her lifetime. It is in our lifetimes. It is in front of us right now. So learn the history and connect the dots to what has happened in the past to what's going on right now. And I would say on a personal level, don't be afraid to talk about it. And I would say for folks who are not Black, talking about anti-Blackness does not make you anti-white, anti-anything else. This is about trying to address the problem, but don't be afraid to talk about it. So I'd say don't be afraid and know the history. Those are the two things I would say. So with that said, I first of all want to thank John Cook from GeekWire for reaching out to me a week and a half ago or 2 weeks for this conversation. I did not know which direction this stream was going to flow. I thank my guests for actually taking the time to be here and I will say this, it is not easy to make yourself vulnerable. And all of you have just shared your heart, your experiences, acknowledge what you don't know, acknowledge what you want to know. And I think that this is something that we need more of. And so thank you to GeekWire for taking this journey with us. Thank you for hosting this event. My name is Marilyn Strickland. It's my honor to be here today. I want to thank my guests, Adriane Brown, Matt Oppenheimer, Dave Cotter. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope that this is maybe the beginning of some other conversations, but it must be a sustained effort. So thanks everyone, and we're signing off.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Thanks, Marilyn.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thanks, Adrienne. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.